Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this narration. The year was 1843 when the Blackwood plantation stood proud among the rolling hills of Albemarle County. Twin sisters Constance and Catherine Blackwood, unmarried at 26, had inherited their father's estate and 40 slaves, including Solomon, valued for his literacy and penmanship. Judge Elias Blackwood's death had come suddenly during a summer evening dinner party, his face turning crimson before he collapsed into his soup tureen, an event recounted in the diaries of 3 separate dinner guests, each noting the peculiar calm with which his daughters received the news. County records show that Judge Blackwood, a severe man known for his harsh sentencing of both white and black defendants, had meticulously updated his will just 3 weeks prior to his demise, a timing that raised eyebrows but generated no formal investigation. A courthouse document, yellowed and water-stained, discovered during a 1935 renovation behind a false panel in the records room, revealed language absent from the official will filed with the county clerk. This addendum, authenticated by handwriting experts from the University of Virginia in 1936, contained the disturbing stipulation that the literate Negro man Solomon shall remain in shared service to my daughters, neither to be sold nor separated from either Miss Constance or Miss Catherine, as his particular talents are required by both in equal measure. The phrase shared service was underlined twice in the judge's distinctive hand, and a small notation in the margin, partially obscured by water damage, seemed to indicate that Solomon had been purchased from a plantation in North Carolina for a sum 3 times the typical price. His literacy and other qualities, deemed particularly valuable for his role in the unusual household that would emerge after the judge's passing. A bill of sale discovered in 1957 within the hollow of an old oak desk once belonging to the Prescott family of North Carolina revealed the origins of Solomon's journey to the Blackwood estate. Solomon had been raised on Oak Ridge Plantation where, in a highly unusual arrangement, he had served as an educated companion to the sickly heir, young Thomas Prescott, who suffered from a congenital heart condition that rendered him unable to attend school with other children of his station. Plantation records recovered from the University of North Carolina archives indicate that Solomon, born to a house servant named Esther, displayed remarkable aptitude for letters from an early age, leading the mistress of Oak Ridge, a former school teacher from Massachusetts with progressive ideas about education, to instruct him alongside her son. By age 16, Solomon could read Greek and Latin, maintain accounting ledgers, and write with a penmanship described as elegant beyond measure in contemporary accounts. When Thomas died at 18 and the Prescott plantation fell into financial ruin following a series of failed tobacco harvests, Judge Blackwood traveled personally to North Carolina upon hearing of Solomon's unusual skills. A private ledger, discovered in 1922 behind a loose brick in the Blackwood Mansion's wine cellar, contained entries in the judge's meticulous hand detailing his negotiations for Solomon's purchase. The disturbing notation for the 12th of April, 1838, reads, "Agreed final sum of $1,800 for the Negro Solomon, triple the standard rate, but justified by his extraordinary literacy and comely appearance, which shall serve my purposes well." The entry continues with a chilling addendum. The specimen appears intelligent and physically sound, with features that, while decidedly African, possess a regularity and proportion that will not offend when kept in proximity to gentle company. Subsequent entries describe the judge's systematic efforts to conceal the exorbitant purchase price from public record, suggesting a premeditated plan for Solomon's role in the household years before the judge's death. A letter from Prescott's widow to her sister, found in 1,970 inches a Charleston attic, expressed deep misgivings about the sale, noting that the judge's manner of examining Solomon, particularly his unusual focus on the young man's physical form rather than merely his educational attainments, left me with a profound unease I cannot name. The Blackwood twins had spent their formative years in near complete isolation, their mother having died during their birth and their father believing that excessive contact with outside society would corrupt their inherent feminine virtues. A collection of letters between Judge Blackwood and his sister in Richmond, discovered in 1913, revealed his peculiar philosophy. The girls require only each other, as nature has provided them with a perfect companion in the form of their twin, a divine mirror through which they might know themselves completely. Growing up with only each other for consistent companionship, Constance and Catherine developed what neighboring families described as peculiar mannerisms, including a habit of completing each other's sentences and standing in identical poses without apparent awareness of doing so. Former house servant Mathilda Jackson, who provided testimony to the Freedmen's Bureau in 1867, described the sisters' relationship in disturbing terms. Them girls wasn't right with each other, always touching, always whispering, like they was one person split in two bodies. They didn't need no words between them, just looks, and they'd know what the other was thinking. When Judge brought that Solomon home, they both looked at him the same way, like he was something fine they'd been promised. Jackson's testimony, buried in federal archives until 1953, further revealed how the sisters treated Solomon after their father's death. They'd sit him between them at the library table, one dictating letters while the other watched how his hands moved on the paper. Sometimes Miss Constance would touch his wrist to correct his position, and Miss Catherine would touch the exact same spot moments later, like she was feeling what her sister felt. They never spoke of him as my servant, but always our Solomon, even when speaking to him directly. They'd say, "Our Solomon will read to us tonight," or "Our Solomon requires new clothes befitting his position." They dressed him finer than any slave I ever saw, in clothes that matched, like they was displaying something they both owned together. The household ledgers from 1843 to 1844, recovered from the County Historical Society, show unusual expenditures for gentlemen's attire, fine soaps, and private quarters furnishings designated specifically for Solomon's use, suggesting the sisters had elevated him to a status unprecedented for an enslaved person, yet still fundamentally rooted in possession rather than recognition of his humanity. As autumn descended upon Albemarle County in 1843, the true nature of the sisters' interest in Solomon began to manifest in clandestine encounters, documented through fragmented sources discovered decades later. A partial diary belonging to Catherine Blackwood, recovered in 1891 from a hidden compartment in her writing desk, contained coded entries beginning in October 1843, met with S. in the East Wing study after C retired. His hands trembled when I requested he read Byron aloud. The stirring in my bosom when he spoke those passionate verses cannot be natural, yet I cannot resist. Meanwhile, household records indicate that Constance had begun requesting Solomon's assistance in the greenhouse during evening hours, ostensibly to transcribe her botanical observations. A letter from Constance to a cousin in Richmond, intercepted by Catherine and found pressed between the pages of a Bible in 1972, obliquely referenced these meetings. I have discovered a particular joy in cultivating exotic blooms under glass with only S as witness to their unfurling. The most revealing document, a fragmentary diary attributed to Solomon himself, was discovered in 1967 beneath a floorboard in what had been his quarters. Written in a barely legible hand on scraps of paper and cloth, the entries reveal his precarious position. Miss Catherine summoned me again tonight. I dare not refuse her advances, though my heart contains no genuine affection. When her hand touches mine, I see both desire and ownership in her eyes. To reject her would mean the lash, or worse, separation from the only place I have known some small measure of dignity. A subsequent entry, dated 2 weeks later, contains the haunting passage, "Now Miss Constance has begun to look at me with the same hunger." Tonight in the greenhouse, she pressed herself against me, speaking of how we might find paradise together, even in this fallen world. I am trapped between twin flames, each unaware of the other's burning. They hold my fate in their hands, These sisters who see in me not a man but a vessel for forbidden desires they cannot name even to themselves. I perform as required, my body responding while my mind retreats to safer harbors. The estate's punishment records, meticulously maintained by the plantation overseer, show no entries for Solomon during this period, suggesting his compliance with whatever was demanded of him, a silence purchased through the threat of consequences too severe to risk. The inevitable collision of the sisters' separate secrets occurred on a stormy December night in 1843, documented in a household servant's later testimony to the Baptist minister who occasionally visited the plantation. According to this account, rediscovered in church archives in 1938, a terrible scream woke the house, followed by the sound of breaking glass. When I crept to investigate, I saw both misses standing in the hallway between their bedrooms, Miss Constance in her nightclothes, Miss Catherine clutching papers to her chest, both staring at each other with such strange expressions, not anger as you might expect, but something like recognition. What transpired between the twins in the privacy of the East Wing remained unrecorded until the discovery in 1902 of a letter hidden inside a false-bottomed jewelry box that had belonged to Catherine Blackwood, written to her maternal cousin in Baltimore but evidently never sent. The letter employed a rudimentary code alternating English with French phrases. "Dearest Margaret, you alone might understand the peculiar bond that exists between twins, how we share one soul divided between two vessels." When I discovered that Constance had also been visiting Solomon's quarters, I experienced not the jealousy you might imagine, but a profound sense of completion, as though the circle of our shared existence had found its missing arc. That night, we made our pact by candlelight, our palms pressed together as they had been in our mother's womb. Solomon would belong to us both, equally and without division. The plantation's account books show that immediately following this night, Solomon was relieved of all regular duties and assigned exclusively to personal attendance upon the Mrs. Blackwood. Most disturbing was the discovery in 1958 of a small leather-bound volume containing only pointing M. dates and initials, alternating CB and CB, on different nights, with occasional entries marked simply, both, suggesting a methodical scheduling of their forbidden arrangement that would soon yield its darkest consequence. By early spring of 1844, the consequences of the twins' arrangement became impossible to conceal, as both sisters began to show signs of pregnancy almost simultaneously. A biological synchronicity, noted with clinical detachment in the Medical Journal of Dr. Thaddeus Wilson, discovered in 1,927 inches, a chest of papers donated to St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The physician's notes from April 18th reveal the sisters' growing desperation, called to the Blackwood estate under utmost secrecy. The Mrs. B, both, present identical symptoms of advancing gestation, approximately 4 months progression. When informed of my conclusion, neither displayed surprise but rather grim confirmation of what they already suspected. Miss Catherine inquired about certain herbal remedies known to restore monthly courses, while Miss Constance, typically the more reserved of the pair, explicitly requested information regarding more direct interventions. I declined to provide such counsel, as both medicine and God forbid it. A subsequent entry dated May 3rd notes, "Second summons to Blackwood Estate. The women have clearly attempted self-treatment with tansy and pennyroyal teas to no effect. Found Miss Catherine feverish from excessive dosage. Miss Constance, despite her own condition, administered cool compresses to her sister's forehead with remarkable composure. Both refused my suggestion to contact their uncle in Richmond, insisting the matter remain strictly among the three of us. The most disturbing evidence emerged from the plantation's purchase records, showing that Catherine had dispatched a trusted house servant to 3 different apothecaries across the county, acquiring quantities of various abortifacients while disguised as a grieving widow. A coded message discovered in the binding of Catherine's Bible, apparently intended for Solomon, suggests his knowledge of their condition. The seed has taken root in both gardens. We are undone unless a solution presents itself. Speak nothing of this to anyone. Our lives hang upon absolute discretion. The final entry in Dr. Wilson's journal regarding the Blackwoods, dated June 1st, reads simply, "They have accepted their condition. God have mercy on whatever children result from this unholy union, for society surely will not. I have agreed to maintain their secret, against my better judgment, out of concern for the innocent lives now growing within them." As summer yielded to autumn in 1844, the Blackwood sisters systematically withdrew from Virginia society. Their expanding waistlines concealed beneath specially commissioned mourning dresses whose voluminous black folds obscured their condition from increasingly curious neighbors. A letter to the local parish explained their absence from services as a period of extended mourning, while correspondence discovered in 1943 between Catherine and the family's Richmond solicitor fabricated an elaborate fiction about pressing inheritance matters requiring our attention from European relations of our late mother. This deception extended to a carefully orchestrated visit from their mother's cousin in Protham, September, during which both sisters wore specially designed corsets that redistributed their pregnancy weight to appear as general plumpness rather than advancing gestation. The visitor's letter to her sister, preserved in a Baltimore historical collection, noted that the twins appear somewhat broadened by grief and seclusion, their complexions pallid, yet they speak animatedly of a possible journey to the continent once certain legal matters are settled. Meanwhile, household account books tell a different story. Discreet purchases recorded in a separate ledger, discovered behind a panel in the nursery in 1921. Detail items incongruous with their public narrative, 2 cradles commissioned from a cabinet maker in a neighboring county, linens suitable for swaddling, and multiple orders for infant garments from a seamstress sworn to secrecy. As winter descended upon Virginia, the Blackwood plantation became increasingly isolated, with instructions to turn away all visitors under the pretense that the sisters had departed for Baltimore. The estate's overseer later testified to the Freedmen's Bureau that no one save Dr. Wilson was permitted beyond the main gate from November until March, while inside the house, certain rooms in the East Wing were declared forbidden to all servants except Mathilda and Solomon. Snow fell heavily that winter, entombing the plantation in pristine white drifts that one household servant later described as a blanket of silence covering up all manner of sin. While behind the mansion's drawn curtains, the sisters waited as their bodies swelled with the physical evidence of their transgression, the synchronized movements of their unborn children binding them even more profoundly in their shared secret. The most haunting testimony regarding the Blackwood twins came to light in 1880, when Eliza Johnson, a formerly enslaved midwife who had assisted numerous births across Albemarle County, made a deathbed confession to Reverend Isaiah Turner of the First African Baptist Church in Charlottesville. The Reverend, troubled by what he heard, transcribed Johnson's words in his personal journal, which remained sealed in church archives until 1932. According to this account, Johnson was brought to the Blackwood estate blindfolded in a closed carriage on a bitter February night in 1845 and kept essentially prisoner there for 3 weeks as both sisters' labor approached. Miss Catherine birthed first, Johnson recounted, laboring from midnight until dawn, making no sound louder than a kitten's mewl despite the pain I know she felt. Miss Constance held her hand throughout, whispering things I couldn't hear. When the child finally emerged, a boy with skin the color of pale honey, Miss Catherine did not reach for him as most mothers do. She simply said, "Clean it and show me," examining the infant as one might inspect a newly purchased calf. Johnson's testimony grows more disturbing as she describes Constance's labor beginning just 30 hours. Later, it was like watching the same terrible play performed twice. The second child, a girl with the same complexion as her cousin brother, was received with the same cold scrutiny. Neither babe was permitted to suckle at its mother's breast, though both women's bodies prepared for nursing. Instead, they instructed me to feed them goat's milk from bottles. Most chilling was Johnson's description of the sisters' behavior when alone with the infants. They would lay those babies side by side on a silk coverlet, studying their features and speaking to each other in half-sentences that needed no completion, like they shared one mind. Once I heard Miss Constance say, "Father would," and Miss Catherine finished. Burn the estate to ashes rather than see this fruit on our family tree. They never held those children with love, only clinical curiosity, as if they'd grown exotic plants rather than human beings. Johnson concluded her testimony with words that the Reverend noted were spoken with evident terror, despite the decades that had passed. "I've attended over 300 births in my life, Reverend, but never have I felt such evil in a birthing room as I did in that house, watching those identical women birth those nearly identical children. Conceived in sin so profound I fear for my immortal soul just for having witnessed the aftermath." On the 10th night following the birth of Constance's daughter, the Blackwood estate was plunged into carefully orchestrated chaos, documented in fragmentary records from multiple sources. Household accounts from February 1845 show the abrupt dismissal of 3 house servants who had peripheral knowledge of the births, each provided with unusually generous severance and transported to different counties. Sheriff Thomas Willoughby's official report, filed in county records and discovered during a 1948 courthouse renovation, contains a terse entry dated the 17th of February 1845. Responded to Blackwood Estate re. Missing male slave and alleged missing property. Mrs. Blackwood claimed valuable slave Solomon fled during night, possibly stealing unspecified valuables. No signs of forced entry. Bloodhound tracking attempted but lost scent at Rivanna River. What the report conspicuously omits is any mention of infants, though a private letter from the sheriff to Judge William Harrison, discovered in the judge's papers in 1963, reveals a different understanding. The matter at Blackwood Plantation grows more disturbing. Rumors among the slave quarters suggest not merely a runaway but the disappearance of infants born to the sisters, though they deny any such births when questioned directly. When I attempted to interview the household staff, I was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Robert Blackwood, the sisters' maternal uncle, who demanded I cease my investigation immediately. The colonel's intervention is confirmed in county supervisor's minutes from February 23, which note, Colonel Blackwood addressed the council regarding unfounded rumors concerning his nieces, requesting that Sheriff Willoughby be instructed to end his investigation into alleged impropriety at the estate. Motion carried unanimously. A partial account from Matilda Jackson, the house servant closest to the sisters, emerged decades later in Freedman's Bureau records. The night Solomon and them babies disappeared, I heard a carriage well after midnight, though I was told to stay in my quarters. Next morning, the nursery was empty, cradles gone. All them baby things vanished like they never existed. Miss Catherine had scratches on her hands, and Miss Constance's nightdress had been burned in the kitchen fire. They told everyone Solomon had stolen silver and run off. But what slave takes nothing but 2 newborns when he flees? And why was the ground behind the spring house newly turned, like something had been buried in haste? Despite Colonel Blackwood's intervention and the official conclusion that Solomon had merely absconded with valuables, whispers spread through Albemarle County like a noxious fog in the months following the disappearances. Ladies who had once eagerly accepted invitations to Blackwood Estate found convenient excuses to decline, while gentlemen farmers who had conducted business with Judge Blackwood now sent representatives rather than calling in person. Parish records from St. Paul's Episcopal Church, meticulously preserved since colonial times, contain a disturbing entry from April 1845. The Misses Constance and Catherine Blackwood, having been absent from services for a prolonged period and being the subject of grave reports concerning moral transgressions, were visited by Reverend Thomas Havermill and 2 church elders. After extensive questioning regarding certain rumors of unnatural relations with persons of servitude and subsequent concealment of the fruits thereof, the sisters refused to answer directly, but neither denied the substance of the accusations. The church vestry votes unanimously for their excommunication on grounds of unspeakable sin against God's natural order. This spiritual banishment was followed by social death, as documented in the diary of Mrs. Eleanor Pendleton, wife of a neighboring plantation owner. The Blackwood twins have become phantoms in our society, mentioned only in hushed tones among the ladies. Even their name has become a byword for degeneracy. Catherine attempted to call upon me yesterday, arriving unannounced in their late father's carriage, but I instructed the housemaid to say I was indisposed. Through the parlor window I observed her standing on our porch, her once proud posture now bent like a willow in storm. For a moment, pity almost overcame my revulsion, until I remembered what my husband's manservant heard from their stable boy, that unholy arrangement, those mixed-blood infants, the suspicious disappearances. Some sins cannot be forgiven in this life, and to associate with such women would taint my own family by proximity. By summer 1845, the Blackwood sisters had withdrawn completely from county society. Venturing from their estate only for essential business, their carriage windows draped with black curtains, their faces hidden behind heavy veils, as if in perpetual mourning for their own ruined lives. In the years following their social ostracism, the once prosperous Blackwood plantation began a precipitous decline reflected in county tax assessments and property records from 1,845 to 1,850. The first evidence of financial distress appears in a deed of sale dated November 1845, showing the sisters relinquishing 200 acres of prime tobacco land to satisfy debts with their father's former business associates, who now demanded immediate payment rather than extending the customary credit afforded to respected landowners. By 1847, tax records indicate the Blackwood holdings had diminished by nearly half, with consecutive sales of parcels to neighboring plantations, often at prices well below market value, suggesting desperate liquidation rather than strategic divestment. Most telling was the gradual reduction in enslaved persons listed as taxable property. The initial complement of 40 individuals steadily decreased as the sisters sold family groups to pay mounting debts. A ledger discovered in the former overseer's cabin in 1937 reveals the sisters' deteriorating mental state during this period, with Catherine's once meticulous handwriting growing increasingly erratic as she noted, "Watched from the woods again today, eyes that know our shame. Must release Adam's family though we need their labor desperately." Their youngest boy resembles what might have been. Constance's entries, distinguishable by their leftward slant, betray growing paranoia. C believes we are merely observed. I know with certainty we are judged and soon to be exposed. The Wilkins girl who delivers eggs saw me in town and crossed herself as if confronted with the devil. They all know, or suspect. Only by maintaining appearances can we hold them at bay. Despite their financial ruin, household accounts show continued expenditures on items meant to project prosperity. Imported fabrics for dresses they would wear for no visitors, fine wines for dinners attended only by themselves, repairs to the mansion's facade while its interior crumbled from neglect. By 1850, county records list the once grand Blackwood estate as significantly diminished in value and acreage, with visible signs of disrepair noted by tax assessor, while a bank notice published in the Virginia Gazette announced the impending auction of remaining Blackwood lands to satisfy outstanding debts, signaling the final collapse of a once prominent family, now consumed by the consequences of its darkest secrets. The question of Solomon's fate remained unanswered for over a century until the summer of 1967, when the University of Virginia's Archaeological Department conducted a routine survey of the former Blackwood lands, then being prepared for residential development. Professor Harmon Ellis and his graduate students, excavating near what historical records identified as the estate's spring house, uncovered human remains that would cast a sinister light on the long-accepted narrative of Solomon's escape. The university's forensic analysis, documented in an academic paper published in the Journal of Southern Historical Studies in 1969, presented disturbing evidence. The skeletal remains, determined to be those of a male of African descent, approximately 25 to 30 years of age, exhibit clear signs of violent death. The cranium bears evidence of multiple blunt force traumas consistent with repeated strikes from a heavy object, possibly a fireplace poker or similar implement. More telling is the position of the remains. The body had been buried face down with hands bound behind the back, with what analysis suggests was fine-quality women's hair ribbon, fragments of which remained preserved in the soil. Carbon dating placed the time of death within months of Solomon's reported disappearance, while the discovery of a distinctive gold-plated shirt button matching the description of those on garments commissioned for Solomon in plantation purchase records provided compelling circumstantial evidence of the victim's identity. Most damning was the recovery of a man's signet ring with initials S.P., buried alongside the remains, which historical researchers later connected to Solomon's birth name, Solomon Prescott, taken from his first owner's family. As was customary on the Prescott plantation, a leather-bound volume of Greek poetry, its pages rotted nearly to dust but its cover still legible with the same initials, was found buried beneath the body, suggesting a hasty disposal of incriminating personal effects. The archaeological report concludes with the grim assessment. The evidence strongly suggests that rather than escaping north as plantation records claimed, this individual, almost certainly the enslaved man known as Solomon, was brutally murdered and his body concealed on the property, likely by or at the direction of the plantation owners themselves, who propagated the fiction of his escape to conceal an even darker truth about the father of their children. The first indication that the Blackwood infants might have survived emerged in 1952, when historian Dr. Margaret Coleman, researching the Underground Railroad's Philadelphia operations, discovered baptismal records at the Third Haven Meeting House dated April 1845, just 2 months after the infant's disappearance from Virginia. The records, preserved in the meticulous hand of Quaker elder Abigail Pemberton, noted the christening of 2 infant children of mixed parentage, delivered into our care by Brother Josiah Reynolds, who retrieved them from Virginia at great personal risk. The timing aligned perfectly with the Blackwood timeline, but it was the detailed physical description that convinced researchers of the connection. Male child, approximately 2 months of age, with amber eyes and birthmark resembling a crescent moon behind right ear. Female child, approximately 1 month, bearing identical marking in same location, suggesting blood relation. This distinctive birthmark, mentioned in Catherine Blackwood's personal correspondence describing her sister and herself as infants, provided a genetic link too specific to dismiss as coincidence. Further evidence emerged in 1978 when a trunk belonging to Josiah Reynolds was discovered in his great-granddaughter's Philadelphia attic, containing a coded journal of his Underground Railroad activities. The February 1845 entry, deciphered by cryptographers from Temple University, revealed, "Tonight completed most troubling retrieval of my career, contacted by B. Johnson, identified by historians as Benjamin Johnson, a free black tradesman who made deliveries to Virginia plantations regarding 2 infants of mixed race in grave danger. Female owner or owners. Writing unclear, provided payment in Blackwood family jewels and detailed map for escape route. Instructions explicit. Children never to know origins. Names to be changed. No record of connection to Virginia preserved. Most unusual. White women. Did not wish to accompany children, but insisted on their removal to prevent a grave sin worse than their conception. Nature of threatened sin, unspecified but implied infanticide if children remained. Subsequent census records from 1,850 identified 2 adopted children, Benjamin and Grace Pemberton, in the household of Philadelphia Quaker merchants, both listed as mulatto. Orphaned, their ages corresponding with the Blackwood infants. School records describe them as unusually similar in appearance, though not twins, with teachers' notes remarking on their extraordinary amber eyes and shared mannerism of completing each other's thoughts, suggesting some form of natural cousinage. Following the financial collapse of their estate, the Blackwood sisters retreated to a small cottage on their remaining 3 acres of land, their decline documented in the concerned letters of Dr. Wilson, who continued to visit them despite community censure. His correspondence with a medical colleague in Richmond, discovered in 1989, describes Catherine's deteriorating mental condition. She converses with empty spaces, addressing them as if they contained her missing child. Most disturbing is her insistence that she can hear infant cries emanating from the old Springhouse Foundation, though that structure was demolished in 1848. She keeps a small infant's gown, yellowed with age, which she endlessly washes and hangs to dry. The final chapter of Catherine's life was recorded in the Albemarle County Coroner's Report, dated the 17th of March, 1861. Female subject identified as Catherine Blackwood, age 44, discovered by her twin sister suspended from ceiling beam in cottage bedroom. Evidence suggests body remained hanging 2 to 3 days before discovery, though sister claimed to have been present in house throughout. Determination: self-murder during episode of melancholia. Following her twin's suicide, Constance's already fragile grip on reality shattered completely. As detailed in commitment papers filed by the county sheriff in April 1861, authorizing her transfer to Western State Lunatic Asylum in Staunton. The admitting physician's notes, preserved in hospital archives and unsealed in 1950, document her condition upon arrival. Patient exhibits classic folie à deux symptomology, though her twin is now deceased. Subject insists she must speak to Catherine before making any decisions, turning to empty space for consultation during our interview. Most concerning is her insistence that her sister's suicide was actually murder committed by the father of our children returned for vengeance, though no evidence exists that the enslaved man Solomon ever returned to Virginia. Asylum treatment records span 17 years, showing no improvement in her condition. Nurses' logs consistently note Constance holding lengthy conversations with her shadow sister and reporting nighttime visits from the children with matched crescent moons behind their ears. Her final words, recorded by night attendant Mary Simmons on the 14th of December 1878, reveal the undiminished power of her delusion. Catherine says it's time. The children have found Solomon's grave, and justice demands we join them in confession. The final chapter of the Blackwood saga unfolded in 1921, when the dilapidated remains of the once grand plantation house were scheduled for demolition to make way for a modern farmstead. During the dismantling process, workers discovered a sealed chamber hidden between the walls of the sisters' adjacent bedrooms, accessible only through a concealed panel disguised as part of Catherine's wardrobe. County Historical Society records describe the chamber's disturbing contents. 2 intricately carved wooden cradles containing tiny skeletal remains, initially mistaken for those of infants, but later determined to be small dogs, carefully wrapped in christening gowns embroidered with the initials C, B, and C. B. Most significant among the artifacts was a leather-bound journal with alternating entries in 2 nearly identical handwriting styles, beginning in the sisters' adolescence and continuing until 1861. The journal, partially deciphered before disintegrating from exposure to air, revealed a disturbing family mythology that had consumed the twins. Grandfather told us today of our grandmother's twin and how they shared everything, including grandmother's husband. This is the Blackwood twin legacy, 1 soul in 2 bodies, needing to be reunited through shared blood. Father understands this. We have seen how he looks at us as we grow into womanhood. Later entries suggest Judge Blackwood had purchased Solomon specifically to fulfill this twisted family tradition. Father has acquired the perfect vessel for our legacy to continue. Solomon will serve as our shared chalice, though he must never know the purpose for which he was chosen. The final pages, dated shortly before Catherine's suicide, contain the most disturbing revelation. We have failed the legacy. The infants should have been raised together as we were, knowing their sacred bond as twins, yet not twins, cousins sharing identical blood through their mothers and father. By sending them away to save their lives, we have broken the circle that has sustained Blackwood twins for generations. The curse falls now upon us alone. When the hidden room's contents were reported in the Charlottesville Daily Progress, 3 elderly men from Philadelphia traveled to view the discoveries, identifying themselves as the surviving children and grandchild of Benjamin and Grace Pemberton, the lost Blackwood children, who had escaped their mother's disturbing legacy but carried its blood into the future, unknowing.